Okay, this is chapter 11, and I am not going to cover this in class at all, as well as chapter 12, which is eukaryotic. I'm going to take you on a tour through the prokaryotic world, pointing out some of the key medically important organisms, as well as eukaryotic organisms. So, you're looking at a variety of different bacteria here. I just wanted to show you that they come in a whole variety of different shapes and odd forms. Look at the guy that's over on the far right in the middle, and you see a fruiting body of a bacterium. And right above it, you see some bacteria that have fruiting bodies. Most of the time people think of fungi with fruiting bodies and not bacteria, but bacteria do have some very odd shapes and forms. Okay, so size. Look at the E. coli size compared to a white cell and a red cell. Notice that these values are given in microns. And remember that a micron, which is written as this, which sometimes is also written as a micrometer, sometimes also written as this, all means the same thing, is a millionth of a meter. So we're now down 1,000 times in value from sizes that you're familiar with, which would be millimeters, which are the tiny little hash marks on a ruler, a metric ruler. And you can see a white cell and a red cell are many times bigger than a E. coli cell. Most bacteria are in the half of a micron up to maybe 2 microns. There are some exceptions to the rule, though. If you look at the picture over here, these guys right over here, this is obviously a dark field, but these 4 guys right over here are paramecium. You know them to be very large. They're maybe 100 microns in size. Look at the comparison to this big boy right here. This is a bacterium, many times more in size than a paramecium, 600 microns. Remember that size does not make him a prokaryotic cell. The lack of a nucleus does. And then you can have a comparison here to a virus. We'll get into those later. But viruses are, again, a value down in size from a micron. In the world of viruses, we use nanometers. But down here you can see a size comparison in microns to an E. coli right here. And this is actually a pretty large virus. A smallpox virus would be one of the bigger ones. Okay, so shapes. Bacillus, or rod shape. You've seen these in lab already. Here's a nice picture perfect one right here. Here's an electron micrograph of a rod. Up here on this color enhanced scanning EM, you see rods. Then the cocci, plural. We have, again on this same picture, these green guys are cocci. And if you look at these guys right over here in a blood smear, these are chains of cocci. Spirals. They can be kind of loose spirals, like this guy, which is kind of like a lazy S here in pink, or a tighter spiral, which looks like a more pronounced S, or what is called a spirochete, this guy down here, which is the syphilis and Lyme disease organism. They almost look like slinkies in their appearance. Then we've got some odd and end guys that don't seem to match a shape. Cocobacilli. Look at this one right over here. Kind of hard to tell whether he is a coccus or a rod. In fact, he's called a cocobacillus. The guy next to him right here. Some of the shapes look like rods, and maybe some of the shapes look like cocci, And some of the shapes kind of look like drumsticks, what is called a drumstick shape. You can see some right here. And that's very distinct for corynebacterium that causes diphtheria. Here's another very odd pleomorphic shape right here. This is bifidobacterium. He's a cousin of corynebacterium. He's got these odd bifurcated or Y-shaped structures. Bifido means split. So again, a lot of bacteria come in some odd shapes, but typically Bacillus, Coccus, and Spiral are the main ones. Arrangements. Again, you've seen these in lab. You've seen chains. I've pointed them out already. Here are some chains in amongst the red blood cells. Clusters. Here's a cluster, as you might see with Staphylococcus. The chain guy down here is Streptococcus. Strepto means chain. By the way, Staphylo means cluster. Then, pairs. Here is a transmission EM showing a pair. This is Neisseria gonorrhea. It's a pair of a coccus like that. And there's another pair here. And there's another pair here. And they're in a capsule. And this guy is the same one you're seeing right here on a gram stain. Now the big pink guys are white blood cells, but look at the tiny little paired bacteria right around the white blood cell. Again, diplo pair. Tetrads. Look at this guy right here. Groups of 4. Then you've got some odd guys. Look at this. This is corynebacterium again. And notice, like right here is a good example. It looks kind of like, look right below here. It looks like the cells are lined up like a picket fence, or as if you put stakes in the ground next to each other. That's called a palisade. So again, the shape and the arrangement sometimes gives you a pretty good indication of an organism. Not always, though. For example, staph, which is this guy right here. He's not the only one that looks like that as a cluster of cocci. He's one of the main ones. He's the main pathogen. But there are others that look like that. So you can't just go by microscopic view. Although it can be really helpful, particularly if there's something unique in shape and arrangement about the organism. Endospores. Already talked about them. We've done spore stains. You see a spore stain. You see gram stains with spores. You see spores in the making. Here's an electron micrograph at the left bottom showing a vegetative cell and 2 spores. The key guys that are spore formers are Bacillus and Clostridium. Lots of pathogenic species in those 2 genus names. Let me remind you about genus names, because we're going to be getting more into that. Genus and species: Homo sapiens, Felis domestica, your house cat. First name, genus, always capitalized. So Bacillus and Clostridium are genus names, or plural, genera, 1 genus. They are italicized or underlined. Species is the second word. I don't have a species on either one of these genera because there are a multitude of species that are pathogenic for each of these genera. But you will see some coming up. Okay, so let me introduce you to the archaea again. Mentioned them, and we're going to go right by them pretty much because they're not medically important. But they are important to the environment. You should be familiar with at least the word and what it means. These guys are in their own domain. They are distant relatives of the eubacteria, what are sometimes called the true bacteria, or the ones that you would be most interested in. The archaea are very primitive bacteria. They live in extreme habitats where no human most often even is found. So the views that you're looking at over here, right over here to the right, is down in a trench that could be 7 miles down, like in the Pacific, where we've got huge they're in the mollusca group. They're not mollusks. I think they're a type of clam, but they're a tubed animal rather than what you think of as a clam. And then, of course, you see a fish. Now, these guys are way out of sunlight. Sunlight you always think of as being the thing that causes photosynthesis and algae and all of the photosynthetic plants that are at the bottom of the food chain, and then everything else lives on them. But this is a whole ecosystem way out of light. The only reason you're seeing this in light is they're using a light on the submergible to show this picture. The base, the food chain base, is bacteria, archaeobacteria. They're living at temperatures of water coming out of the magma of the earth, as well as other elements like sulfur and things like that. The water temperature is many times boiling temperature. At the bottom, again, another example of where you might find archaea of the thermophilic type. You're looking at about half a mile up above Yellowstone National Park. It's highly volatile there. There's a big volcano under Yellowstone, lots of boiling pots, geysers, boiling lakes. The steam you can see coming off this lake. This is called Giant Prismatic Lake, and you can see lots of colors of yellow, orange, tan, brown. These are all a variety of bacteria, some photosynthetic, some not, but they're all living in temperatures that are really extreme. These are thermophiles. These are, and in fact, all of these most often are called extremophiles because they live in extreme situations. Halophiles, extreme salt, and I'm not talking about salt water now. Salt water is only 3.5%. I'm talking about the Dead Sea or Great Salt Lake. Those salt contents are about 20%. The methanogens, these are the guys that make methane gas. They would be found in animal digestive tracts, particularly the ruminants that have many chambered stomachs like cows and antelopes, things like that. They're also found around areas in the environment, marshes, a whole variety of different places. They're environmentally important for methane production. You also find thermophiles, by the way, in compost piles, which are about the temperature of 70 degrees Celsius. Remember, your body temperature is 37. So here's a look, one last point before we leave the archaea forever. Here's a look at Halobacterium. This is a salt plant right around Great Salt Lake, and the pink U to the little ponds where they're purifying salt is Halobacterium, which has a pink tint to it. And you can see where you find some of these extremophilic archaea. But again, they're not medically important, and we're leaving them forever now. Okay, so let's get to the medically important bacteria. They're called the eubacteria. They're in their own domain. All right, so I'm going to take you through, realize first of all that there are way more bacteria that we're going to talk about. I'm going to take you through some gram-positive bacteria first, and I'll take you through some gram-negative. And I've highlighted the ones that are most important from a medical standpoint in blue. And as I go through, I'll point out what they do. Okay, so let's go with a rod called Mycoplasma pneumonia. In fact, it tells you exactly what it does. It causes pneumonia, but it's also a very important STD, sexually transmitted disease, not just pneumonia. It's hard to grow, very, very picky. This is the guy you may remember from an earlier chapter, has no wall. Look at the bizarre shapes. It has no rigidity. It's wall-less. It lives without a wall. Bacillus anthracis, anthrax. That's the key pathogen for the group. Another gram-positive rod. Remember, spore former. Listeria monocytogenes. Look at the picture right over here. And look right there at these. This is a gram-positive rod. Very important in foodborne illness, particularly milk. Big organism in disease related to milk, particularly children. Staph aureus you already know about. MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, vancomycin-resistant Staph aureus, as well as just plain old Staph aureus. Toxic shock syndrome, boils, abscesses, blood poisoning, a variety of things. Corynebacterium diphtheria, you're looking at it right here. Again, kind of odd shapes, rod, gram-positive again. The key guy in this group is diphtheria. We have a few cases of diphtheria every year down in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, mainly associated with people not getting vaccinated. You've all been vaccinated, I would assume you have, for the diphtheria. It's part of the DPT, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. Strep pyogenes and its very close sister, Enterococcus. Enterococcus actually used to be in the genus Streptococcus, and they took it out and made it its own genus. The key pathogen for the group, actually there are a couple, but here's the main guy, Pyogenes. He's sometimes called beta hemolytic group A strep. Sometimes you see him referred to as GAS, group A strep. He's a beta hemolytic organism, breaks down blood cells, makes pus, that's what pyo means. He's group A. There are a lot of strep species, and they're divided up into groups, so this is a group A. Sometimes you hear them referred to as flesh-eating bacteria. They cause abscesses. They cause some similar problems to what staph might. Endocarditis, also pneumonia, meningitis, a very potent high mortality organism. It used to be one of the big problems of the 1600s, 1700s, 1500s, right up there with plague and leprosy, tuberculosis, smallpox. But then in the 20th century, with antibiotics, it was not virtually eliminated. It's still all around the place, but its mortality came down drastically. Clostridium, a kind of a distant cousin up to Bacillus right there. Gram-positive rod, 3 key species that are very pathogenic for man. Tetanus, tetani. Botulism, botulinum. By the way, the same place where they get Botox to eliminate wrinkles and treat some other medical problems. Perfringens, gas gangrene. Mycobacterium tuberculosis, we're going to be talking about in much more detail as a disease, so I won't get into him. Good view of Mycobacterium. This is an acid-fast stain. You can see the hot pink rods, very slight rods in the picture. And the last guy I want to mention is the group called Actinomycetes, and the main genus is Streptomyces, and he's over here at the far right corner at the bottom. He doesn't cause much in the way of disease. I mean, kind of an odd infection here and there, but very inconsequential as a pathogen. But his importance is in antibiotic production. This genus has a whole variety of species. We've already talked about this probably in the antibiotic chapter. Dozens of antibiotics. Very important ones: gentamicin, tobramycin, amikacin, ivermectin used in HeartGuard for dogs for reducing worm infections. So, very important group. Okay, the gram-negative bacteria. This is probably the more important of the two, not because the bacteria are higher mortality, but because there are many more infections caused by these guys, at least in the United States. And let me start with the major group that is the big boy here. We're in the family Enterobacteriaceae. Here is your poster boy for this family, E. coli, and all of his cousins: Salmonella, Shigella, Proteus, Klebsiella, Enterobacter, Yersinia. The list goes on. Your typical infections lots of urinary tract infections, septicemias. It's just a humongous group of infections caused by that family. Another big boy, for a couple of reasons. The Pseudomonas genus, the main pathogen is aeruginosa. Probably in lab when we did antibiotic sensitivities, I ran some demos, did some plates of Pseudomonas aeruginosa. We don't like to give it out in lab for you to use because it is pathogenic. Very antibiotic resistant. Causes lots of infections, particularly in immunocompromised people, cystic fibrosis patients, HIV, just a really big genus. Burn victims, another group. Some of the other guys, Neisseria meningitidis and gonorrhea, that's pretty self-explanatory. Bordetella pertussis, whooping cough, which is making a comeback these days, even though probably most of you, if not all of you, have had vaccines for it. Not so much in adults, and not in vaccinated adults, but in children and adults who've not been vaccinated. Campylobacter jejunii, a big cause of foodborne illness, very, 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 very common. Helicobacter pylori, the cause of ulcers. Very acid tolerant, as you might guess. Chlamydia, the genus Chlamydia. There are different species. You'll notice he's not in pink, so that means he's not quite as important as the other guys that are in pink. But actually, he's in the top 3 or 4 probably of STDs. It's just that he causes a lot of asymptomatic infections, particularly in women. The spirochetes, let's stay on STDs. Treponema pallidum, the cause of syphilis. Remember, he's the spirochete guy. In fact, you can see him right over here. And his very close cousin, Borrelia, which we have in this area. Here he is. Lyme disease. Bacteroids, lots of infections, gram-negative rod. I didn't point out which of these are cocci and which ones are rod. Bacteroids are rods. Spirochetes are spirals. Chlamydias are cocobacilli. Helicobacter and Campylobacter are these guys in the middle. You can see that they are spirals. Pseudomonas enterobacter, Bordetella are rods. You can see E. coli right there, very small, short rods. Neisseria, everything in this genus is a coccus, and somehow I skipped the rickettsia up here. We have some rickettsia pathogens in the U.S. Rocky Mountain spotted fever is a big one. But in a lot of countries it's a more prominent guy because he causes typhus, which we don't really have a lot of in anywhere you would probably be around. Okay, so to finish these guys up, why are bacteria important? They're big pathogens. They spoil food. They're used in food preparation, like lactobacillus, not a medically important organism, but important in cheese, yogurt, and cottage cheese and such, as well as other foods. Antibiotic production, nitrogen fixation, turning nitrogen in the air into ammonia, and then into nitrates. Photosynthesis, some of them, not medically important ones though. Pollutants and polluting organisms, and they're very often important in geological cycles and decomposition. The picture you see over here at the bottom left is a fish that, uses bacteria in the darkness. It lives in deep, deep water. It's got a little bag of luminescent bacteria it uses in darkness to clue in potential mates. So it's got like a little lid, extra lid. It opens and closes for light, kind of like a lightning bug of a sort, except lightning bugs don't have luminescent bacteria. Here's another view of Yellowstone National Park. This is a picture I took. Remember that shot of giant prismatic spring? It had the beautiful blue, greens, yellows, oranges radiating out away from the water. This is some of the area further out from the water. These are all bacterial mats out here, just covered with bacteria. And then up at the top is Streptomyces. Nice view, very different kind of bacterium when you look at it on a colony. Other bacterial colonies don't look anything like that. He's the antibiotic producer. So there's your tour through the bacteria.